Awesome. Well, hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Robert Barris. I'm the Senior Vice President of Innovation at 352, and welcome to Off the Record. This is now our sixth episode in the world of quarantine. So happy for you guys to join us. We've been hosting Off the Record for the past 4 years as a way to connect our innovation community and learn from industry leaders. So we're so happy to have you here and join us. Um, we're gonna start asking questions early on. So today, I want you to start thinking about. So we got Alex Gonzalez from the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. He's their Chief Innovation Officer. We're going to be talking about what the world looks like in a sort of a current and of course post COVID world. And once you start thinking about what you'd want to ask Alex as it relates to perhaps the innovation community, start thinking about what might be some of the challenges that you'd want to have Alex's opinion on as you think about working in a downturn economy, and how do you be innovative with some of these pressures and stresses. So I just want you to start thinking about that now. If you'll post them in the chat as we start moving this morning, Karen or myself will start to surface some of those in the conversation. But I'm just going to turn towards Alex. Alex, happy to have you here.
Megan, nice to be here. And congratulations on the series. I think it's great for Atlanta, great for the innovation community that you're keeping the connectivity with the community going and the conversation as well, because I know how innovators are, and they are very forward thinking, and I think it's great to have the support to get them through this.
Well, I appreciate that. And Alex, I don't know if you recall, and I don't know if some of the other members of the show recall, but you were actually our very first off the record. Back then, it was called the Enterprise Entrepreneurship Series, our very first speaker. And so all these years later, you've come back. I feel like it's a little like Alec Baldwin on SNL. So we're happy to have you back. I feel like you've participated in a couple of roundtable discussions. So just feels like you've been a part of the community since the beginning.
Well, you guys do an incredible job, so I don't even want to see that video of that, because I'm sure, not that I'm any good now, but I don't even know what the heck I'd be talking about back then. But no, it's great. You guys have again really been an institution here in the innovation community here in Atlanta.
Well, I appreciate it. So, for those of our audience who aren't as familiar with the Metro Atlanta Chamber, could you just give kind of a high-level overview of what their mission is, and then talk a little bit about your role within that, and what you're supposed to be doing in the Atlanta ecosystem?
Yeah, Metro Atlanta Chamber, first of all, a lot of people don't realize this, but we're a private organization, a private nonprofit organization. We're supported by our business community. And for us, there's actually a lot of chambers, chambers of commerce in Metro Atlanta. As a Metro Atlanta chamber, the primary kind of support or investors, the people that kind of back us is a corporate business community. So think about the big brands. Many of you who work for them on this chat here, the Cokes, the UPSs, the Invescos of the world. In fact, our current chairman is Marty Flanagan, who's the CEO of Invesco. Previous to this, we had the CEO of UPS, David Abney. Next year, Ed Bastian is our chair, CEO of Delta. So this business community, who always has been great for Atlanta and what we do, is really who backs us. And we're here really to make sure we have a healthy environment, really for all businesses. And that's whether it's making sure we are able to attract the businesses, help our current business be able to grow, and also being able to promote our region and from a business-friendly environment, not only just to attract companies, but also to attract talent. From my perspective as Chief Innovation Officer, which is a relatively new role, so a little bit over a year now, my focus is really about having a vibrant innovation ecosystem. So making sure all companies and all people could, like I like to say, are able to dream and make those dreams a reality. And so and we think about innovation, which I think is important. Clearly, we think about our startup ecosystem, which we have a very healthy, vibrant ecosystem for that as well. We think about our mid-market companies, but it's also about our corporations. It's also about our universities. It's also about our creative community. It's also about, it's our tech community. It's our non-tech community. It's really about all those elements of the ecosystem to help them connect, help them grow. And I mention that because many times when people think innovation, they think it's all about startups, which is a healthy big part of it. But here in Atlanta, and with many of you on the call, as you know, we have over 30, close to 40 innovation centers, and many companies are not even counted in that don't have formal innovation centers. So the corporate innovation is a really important part of how we think about innovation at Metro Atlanta Chamber and within the region.
And so you touched on a little bit of what's in our ecosystem. Why do you feel like that's different than maybe other cities that have some form of like bubbles of innovation that are starting to rise?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's really a few things. First of all, for innovation in general, you even forget about regions, kind of at its cornerstone, diversity of thought is important. And the collisions that diversity creates. And there's kind of a couple dimensions. One, we have great embedded diversity in terms of our talent. And for those of you many of you on this call probably know that, we talk a lot about inclusive innovation and how do we get the full potential, particularly in our entrepreneurial community, of our talent to be able to participate. So that in itself is something that deliberacy is unique. The diversity of our industry as well. I mean, you think about a lot of regions around the world, around the country, for sure. There are one industry town, two, three industry town. I mean, we talk about everything from logistics to healthcare right now to esports, and more and more and more and more. And so imagine, as with what 352 does, one day you're working on hardcore logistics, next thing you're working on consumer goods. That transfer of talent is incredibly important. But also, this desire and this ability here in Atlanta for all these things to collide, to see the creative community and the tech community collide to create something new. Those collisions are so important for Atlanta. And look, here's the thing with Atlanta as well. We are, I like to say we're like a teenager figuring out its identity. And that's great for innovation because you can make an impact here. And I think when people come to Atlanta and the great talent that we have, the great leaders we have, they believe they can make an impact. And that willingness to do, that willingness to collide, this willingness to cooperate, that spirit and that culture here in Atlanta is what makes us distinct. So that's just a few things that makes us unique. And I'll be honest with you, that also the combination of what we have from, we talk about the strength of our startup community and our entrepreneurial community, but our corporate community really brings a lot to the table in terms of what it can contribute, and the potential for it. So the collisions between those two is pretty critical.
Very cool. Before we get into maybe some direction or advice you might give to companies who are just trying to figure out what do we do to be innovative, I think it'd be interesting just for the group to hear a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
You've worked in some pretty interesting areas, and I would imagine that sometimes, especially in corporate environments, it can feel like maybe a more conservative approach to innovation. And obviously, you've had a background in what I might argue is some varying degrees of conservative versus more aggressive approaches to innovation. So yeah, I think it might be helpful just to give a little bit of context before we move forward.
Yeah, look, I come from over 20 years of corporate experience, and I've been on the front lines in business development. I've run business units. I've also run strategy, innovation, marketing groups. So, my corporate career started at actually even way back. I actually started at a bank. I started my corporate career many, many, many years ago at a company called Chubb Insurance, so in the financial services sector. I went on and spent a big part of my career, like I like to tell people, my growth in my career was really at GE, in their financial services segment, their insurance segment, and did everything there from business development to running a Six Sigma organization. I'm not a math guy, and somehow I ended up running the most statistically driven organization there. But it really was key in unlocking that collision of that stats and math to unlock customer potential was essential. Ended up running probably the first customer experience group at GE before it was cool to use the term customer experience as it is now. That's when people are just learning about Net Promoter Score and all that. And then went on to Equifax, where kind of, I came in to run their strategy group, innovation, marketing, and I ended up running one of their business units for a while, and then ran innovation. And then I spent several years before coming to the chamber, really focused on giving kind of coaching and some consulting around innovation, particularly for people in large organizations, and really talking to executives at how to unlock their innovation potential at a personal level. Because if you're at a certain level in an organization, how your innovative is key to unlocking it for the rest of the organization, because it always comes back to a person. So frankly, the last 4 years coming into the chamber, and even now, with shows like Disruptor Studio, I'm spending a lot of my time, focusing on how to unlock that innovation potential, innovators DNA within you. But I mentioned going back to Rob, to your question, as you notice, those companies, I'm not talking about, Google and all these, sexy innovation companies.
Yeah.
A lot of them are in financial services, conservative companies. And innovation was essential there. And so I mentioned that because as we kind of go into this environment of constraint and, not having the full budget, whatever it is, I've lived it in conservative organizations who maybe didn't understand the full potential initially of innovation or whatever. So it really taught me a lot in terms of how do you drive buy-in, how do you drive change management in organizations to be able to enable growth.
Totally. So it's a good segue. I wanted to liaise into. I mean, we're in a time where some companies are cutting back dramatically, right? They're doing hiring freezes. They're freezing budgets for spend, and it feels like that might stifle innovation, right? It feels like it might say, listen, we don't want to try anything new. We don't want to be risky. But there's a lot of schools of thought, my own as well, where in a downturn, it's the time to be innovative. And I would be curious to hear your point of view on, what advice and guidance would you give a company or maybe just even the people on the call as innovators? What would you give them as advice to deal with the circumstance and context of today in a world where innovation is incredibly important?
Yeah, I think it is essentially important. And we've seen, and I've been part of companies where during downturns, some of the best investments, innovations that's occurred. And there's a lot of, if you look even back to the last economic downturn, the Great Recession, there's, was the birth of many big, great companies or big companies and innovation. So I think, it is important, one, to understand that this is a time to innovate. One, two is, I will say that if you think about what we're facing now, it's not just an economic crisis, it's a public health crisis as well too. And I would say that innovation is more essential, more than ever in the short term, not just to solve for the long-term strategic value of the company, but to solve for problems right now. How do we deal with this health crisis? How do we help small businesses be able to survive? How do we restructure ourselves within our own company, if you're in a big company, to be able to thrive or survive or enable? How do we enable virtual officing, around a global organization? How do we serve our customers who can't, access us directly? So there's some real-time innovation. And maybe people do that say, well, I'm just solving problems that innovation is about. So first of all, there's that bucket that innovation is needed now more than ever. I just wrote a little bit about that just recently. But when I think about those, for those of you on the call and those of you who are living in the organizations, it's very disorienting right now. And so I always tell people, understand, what you can control, what you can't control, and how to move forward. And and part of it is understanding your company reality as well. So some companies are in complete survival mode, and if your revenues drop, 90%, whatever it is, it's going to be a different perspective for those companies that are kind of in maintenance mode, or those companies that are frankly, actually getting a tailwind because of the current environment. So understanding what the realities of your company is and accepting it, embracing that you might have a role. For a lot of you who are on this call and are innovation folks, you tend to be thinking long term, but you may have a role in terms of the short term solutions, and being able to embrace that. Rapidly reprioritizing what you're doing is essential right now for two reasons. One is it just might be needed. So you might be working on a project to be able to drive revenue in 21, 22, 23, but you might have to do some stuff to help, the short term. But the other thing is, we know there's a lot of behaviors that's going to be changing forever and ever as a result of this. So being able to reprioritize what you do is important. And then the other thing I'm going to tell people is you got to be empathetic and not be tone deaf. And I worry about that sometimes, where you might kind of go into your shell and not being really sensitive to what's happening around you, not just in terms of your actions, but how you communicate. This may not be the time to be, talking about, bragging about something that's not relevant today, even though it's important, but just not being tone deaf and understanding when to kind of go out, or when to kind of be, keep things in, and how to be empathetic when people around you are losing jobs, or they're concerned about what's happening. And then of course, what I would say is, if you are an innovation or strategy function too, is I mentioned all those things about being empathetic, probably a little bit more short-term than you've ever been before, but keep an eye on the long-term. Because as I mentioned before, so much is changing. I mean, I think there's some behaviors now, even as we all are in our homes, having this meeting that's going to have some permanent changes in terms of how we might operate as consumers, how our business might operate. It's your job, it's our job to understand those trends and be understanding the seeds we need to plant now to be able to either adapt or capture the value from that as well too.
A couple of questions surfacing in the chat. Are there any characteristics or behaviors that you observed for companies using coming out of the 2008, 2009 recession might give us signals about who would succeed either by company or what types of innovators would succeed?
Yeah, I think that first of all, there's a pragmatic aspect in terms of financial health. So obviously, if you're in a company or if you have companies that have the capital and the position, whether it's a large company or even an early stage company that have the ability to survive, whatever disruptions happening in the next couple months or year or whatever the case might be from a financial perspective. Clearly, those companies have the financial health to, one, survive it, and two, be able to invest in it. And I would say that, sticking to, purpose and vision and strategy. So I think the great companies, this goes back even to leadership. I going back to my days of, when Jack Welch was running GE, and you'd always would talk about, anybody could manage a short term, anybody could manage a long term. Leaders are to be able to manage both. And I think at times like this, that's evident more than ever. It might mean you have to pivot some of the short term, but there are definitely some long term perspectives that you still kind of rationalize in. And I'll give you a real life example here in Atlanta. I mean, if you think about Delta, I mean, look, it's no secret. I mean, they're being severely impacted as the whole travel industry is from what's happening with COVID. But if you look at the actions, they look at their communication plans, or you look at the things they're doing, they look at in terms of how they're planting seeds for recovery. For when you come back, you're going to hopefully be a loyal customer to Delta. So those long-term strategic things that you do now while you're making sure you manage that short term, you're planting the seeds for the long term. I think those are all that things that help people come out of recoveries like this too.
I'd be curious just on that point around Delta, and obviously we may not know the inner workings, but would you imagine that that is a that is like a long-term strategy that they sort of built in? In other words, like they had an intent behind their innovation as opposed to reactively sort of creating a strategic framework at this moment in time. They just might be reacting to the circumstance. But I'd be curious just to hear your thoughts on I guess where companies like a Delta could survive and thrive in this type of world. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on sort of that strategic structure you might need to be innovative versus just the reactionary piece of it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think anything always comes back to vision and purpose and your strategy. And I think when you're going through a difficult time, it's how do you test that and how do you stay true to who you are? And again, without knowing the inner workings of Delta, I'll use them as an example. I mean, clearly they had they've had even before this. If you've just been around them, or as most of us are customers of theirs, you understood that they definitely had this service-driven, experience-driven strategy. And so even as they go through this extremely difficult time, you still feel that brand essence come through and how they're reacting to it. So yeah, I think you're right, Robert. I think the companies who do two things have the strategic framework in place. I would also go to the second thing. In a time like this, have that disaster kind of recovery, crisis management infrastructure in place, and then has a strength to be able to maintain the seeds of where we're going and also adjust to it as well too. Because I think you could have a vision and a strategy and a purpose, but in a time like this, you're also going to have to understand that there's going to be some things you do to get there that might be different. Now, I think that's what makes great companies be able to thrive at a time like this, for sure.
Totally fair. I have a few more questions from the group. Basically, one of the questions is, how do you market the Atlanta innovation stories? And also, how can this group directly or indirectly help your organization meet those goals?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question, and it's actually something we've been actively working on with the innovation community, and actually something we've been working on real time. We did some work with a lot of our innovation ecosystem out there, and some people may have even been part of some work we did with one of our partners to really take a pulse of the innovation ecosystem. And we talked to about 130, 150 people, ranging from corporate to startups to education and so forth. And one of the things that keep coming back is that we need to tell our story. Now, for those of you who are marketers in the room, the next thing you ask is, well, to whom? And it could be anything from venture capitalists to talent, to investors, to media, whatever the case might be. So we've been working with with the ecosystem, and we in terms of how do we do that more proactively as a chamber. We've been using our platform to be able to, probably more than ever, to help tell the stories. But frankly, our ecosystem does a good job telling its own story itself. And I'll give you an example. One of the things we don't want to do is just have a tagline and that's our story for innovation. The best things you see is, like, for instance, Fast Company last year, actually Business Week as well, featured Atlanta multiple times about really being the next great place for startups and inclusive innovation and all that. Those stories tell themselves. Having Sarah Blakely and Ed Bastian on stage at either at CES or South by, those are the best stories. So for us, it's as we go into 2020, it's how do we partner with the, I saw John Avery with the ATDCs of the world, our corporate partners, our investors of the world, whomever it is, to collectively tell those stories in a way that's authentic and organic. But the stories, the individual stories, are the ones that are able to tell.
That makes sense. Sorry, Karen, could you do a mute assist for us if you don't mind?
I'm working on.
You're all good. Okay, thank you. It's that live. It's a feeling that live. The electricity.
Yeah, the live, exactly.
The live show. Anyway. Okay, fair enough. I had another question around what are some of the real-time problems that you feel like need to be solved, and what innovation, sorry, I just lost my train of thought here. What are the real-time problems that need to be solved, and what innovation or reimagine do you think will have to happen to get back to a new normal? So are you hearing and seeing any real problems at this day and age that you feel like right now needs to be addressed, that people even on the call could be looking at?
Well, I mean, you could take that question to kind of multiple depths of levels of problems. So, but what I would say, and look, the first thing, without a doubt, as I mentioned before, this is not just an economic issue. This is a health issue.
Yeah.
So without a doubt, healthcare innovation right now, is item one. And when we talk about this, health is the top topic. And now what's amazing here in Atlanta is with Emory and CDC and there's a lot of work being done, down the world, but clearly that's one. The second thing is, just in terms of business continuity for small businesses and a lot of our businesses, so there's some real innovation, potentially how to help that. And by the way, there's companies that are working towards that, both on the health side and both how do you help, small business with cash and so forth. In terms of, so that's really about to me, the immediate, things to solve, right? How do you have a healthy environment? How do you have an economically vibrant environment? Beyond that, I think everything's being shaped. And I think within your industry, if you're in a retail front industry, when are consumers going to come back? And forget about what governments do or whatever. When are consumers going to come back? And you could start observing trends around the world. When are consumers going to buy? What do you need to do different to be where the consumer's mentality is? So I know you guys at 3-5 talk about this all the time about human-centered innovation and being empathetic, and I'm a huge believer that the people are at the center of innovation. I would challenge everybody to call is put yourself in whoever your customer base is. Put yourself where your consumer is at. Where's the mentality today? Where's it going to be in the future? And is that going to either change the dynamics of what you're innovating about or how you're innovating? Because there's going to be changes. There's going to be changes and some of them might be interim, but some of them might have longevity. I mean, there's a lot of speculation as we're all here, transmitting from home, that could have an impact in terms of even workspace and all that. So what does this all mean? Those are the things I think people on this call need to be thinking about.
Yeah, one other problem I would surface, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and it's funny, I remember 15 years ago, people were talking about digital transformation. And I
Yeah.
remember that, it continues to be a topic that even is relevant. And obviously there are businesses designed around change management for that. And it feels like this has obviously exacerbated that, whether that is just pure video conferencing and what is it like to operate from home and file management, et cetera. Be curious what your thoughts are on that. It feels like a funny evergreen topic that all of a sudden has become much hotter right now for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and I don't want to, date myself back into the, big e-commerce days, and
Yeah.
people had, e-commerce was you having an auxiliary building with foosball tables or something to, show that you're e-commerce, and so it is amazing how far we've come. So yeah, no, I think there's two dimensions. I would, so much of, I think, even digital adoption is really based on what consumers are comfortable with, or businesses, or whomever it is comfortable with. I think if anything, with the country effectively quarantined, if you're working from home, and companies, many big companies saying, look, we're going to be working from home for a while, and people, ordering from the grocery stores and all that. I think you're going to see a lot more consumers get comfortable with it. And I think, if anything, that'll definitely accelerate some platforms that already exist today. I think it might introduce new aspects of where some, I'll take the restaurant industry, where they might decide to have more of a digital delivery or whatever platform that maybe they didn't invest in today. It might make some executives more believers of it. So I think clearly this behavior will drive that. Now, I'm going to also say something on the complete extreme, because people are like, oh, people are never going to go to concerts, and people will come back. If anything, this might create a premium for experiential elements. Maybe, is the frequency going to be the same? Maybe not. Is, when it happens, is it going to be more premium? Possibly. I mean, look at the movie business, pre-COVID and all that. If you think about movie theaters in general, they've been going towards a premium trajectory for years now. And I think, I forget the source, it's been years since I read this. Remember George Lucas and Steven Spielberg years ago, when the direct distribution model became more, and streaming started becoming prominent, and you're just getting on demand, and people started getting big TVs, people thought theaters would die. And one of them, I thought, said something to the fact that it's actually going to do the opposite effect. Theater is going to be more of a premium experience, and that's what we've been seeing, right? With the big seats and all that. So there's some other while we talk about digital consumption, I think there's going to be some experiential shifts we will see down the road in that, and that aspect of the business economy. So this is where I think, as innovators, really thinking through and being human-centered and understanding behavior is going to be essential.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. We've been having a lot of conversation, both internally as well as in things we've done and heard in qualitative research, because our work continues on with many of our clients. And we'll hear consumers say things like, I wonder when it'll be safe to host a dinner party. I wonder when it'll be safe to go to a concert or to just go to a mall or something. And so this sort of preparation and thinking through what is, to your point about human-centered design, what are the unmet needs that we have to start to solve for now that are not all that far away from reality. I mean, it's probably a few more months before things get a little bit more back to normal, but it's probably a longer term recovery in that way, and people have to feel safe in public.
And look, and it might accelerate some things. You saw, obviously, I think everybody probably saw the news about it. I think is it Neiman Marcus or Saks? I forget which one was about. One of the big retail stores that's rumored to be filing bankruptcy this year. And you could say, hey, is that directly to COVID? Well, it should exacerbated it, but there's been a trend around how people shop. And you're seeing it, and even malls are different. For those here, whether it's the Atlantic Station, the Avalon experiences are the ones who people want to have direct brand experiences, and so there's a lot of strain in department stores. So an environment like this might just accelerate that, when people are deciding to, there's certain I can shop for digitally, and then when I go out, it better be a special experience. I mean, at my heart, at core, I'm an innovation person, strategy person, but I'm a customer experience person. I do believe that there's experience around everything. And this is just, I think, kind of refined for consumers in their head. What are the experiences that matter? What are the experiences I want to go out for? And what are the experiences I could manage right from my home from my laptop?
Yeah, totally fair. A question on Avery, in fact. Are you hearing any input right now about how Atlanta companies will manage the restart? Any policies that you're hearing about that stand out to you?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Yep. Are you hearing anything about how Atlanta companies will manage the restart? Any policies that you're hearing about that might stand out that's worth sharing?
I haven't, look, I think like anything else, every company has taken, a distinct approach. I mean, I do know with particularly our larger companies, many of them, to the whole aspect of working from home are, in fact, I spoke to one the other day where they've had, thousands and thousands of employees working from home, and it has gone so smoothly that they're not in a rush to get them back to their offices, and they are, running full speed in terms of both their short-term needs and their long-term needs from that. So yeah, I haven't heard anything uniform. I think it's all over the place. I think particularly for big companies, there's going to be some comfort. A lot of them are going to be operating in this mode. Now, I think the bigger question, I mean, getting John to the other question in terms of kind of the restart, I don't know if it's about the companies. It's going to be about how consumers behave. When are they going to start buying products? When are they going to be comfortable to do that? And I'm not talking about just even going out to buy stuff, even online, because I don't think people are purchasing stuff online necessarily, or they subscribing to whatever it is. But in general, though, I would say for a lot of our companies, it's a lot of them have really been able to adapt very quickly to this environment, and but are able to be more efficient and productive working, from home or whatever the case might be.
I have a multi-part question here. I'm going to start with the first part. It's around startups. So, how do you see startups and early stage companies thriving right now, if at all?
Do I see any of them thriving?
Yeah, pretty broad question, but are you seeing any startup or early stage companies thriving right now?
Yeah, and I think for startups, no different than your large companies. Just actually, I would say it's just more exacerbated. So, I mentioned before that, when you asked about what are the companies in the prior environment that survived and thrived, and I mentioned there's an element of their own financial strength. Startups have a much thinner margin on that, but clearly, I would say, the startups who have a capital structure, the capital to be able to get through 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, or extend their runway, are, you see a lot of that going on. Look, everybody's being impacted. Everybody's hurting. But what you are seeing, though, are companies that are focused on healthcare. That on the startup world, some of them, John on the phone at ATDC, who, they're thriving. Virtual healthcare, those are thriving. So those companies definitely are seeing some tailwinds there, and some around financial, health as well too. So those are the startups who are doing it. Then beyond that. Some of the SaaS-based companies, it may not be that they're doing well now. They've seen some, obviously their demand depressed, but they're able to really kind of plan out, for the next 12, 18 months in terms of kind of getting through whatever cycle we're in to be able to resume demand. Because if you're in a product that ultimately there's going to be demand for, and there might be just a dip in it, it's more of a length play than it is, in terms of immediacy. But look, there's also obviously companies that are, really struggling. And, the sectors that are really being hampered on the big company side are being hampered on the startup side. So I'm sure I know there's a lot of companies struggling. But I will mention, I think the ones that on the startup side, the most difficult time, the one I worry about are those really early stage companies who are kind of in that early funding or have very limited funding and have 3 months of cash and, and which may need 6 or whatever. Those are the ones that I do worry about at a time like this in terms of their survival. But we do have a very vibrant startup community and a lot of discussions taking place. But look, there's going to be definitely some, entrepreneurs that aren't going to be able to make it out of this environment. But to the question, there are companies definitely that are also kind of, thriving. We want to use that term at a time like this.
Yeah, a couple other questions within that one thread. Is the chamber still managing a cohort of startups during this time? And if so, how are you helping them with corporate partners when many of them are just trying to keep their own heads above water?
Yeah, we do not manage any cohorts of startup companies. The one thing I think they might be referring to is we do have a program called Backed by ATL, where we have currently a group of 20 mid-sized companies, so not corporations, not startups. So companies like, Pindrop and Gathering Spots and, Sales Law, scaling companies that we have a relationship with, and we're kind of give them, support and resource and so forth. So yeah, we don't get involved directly with the startups because frankly, there's a lot of organizations around Atlanta that we support, like ATDC and ATV and Russell Center and Launchpad 2X and others that do an incredible and are doing an amazing jobs talking to their startup constituents. In terms of our backed by ATL companies, what we're doing for them is we're giving a lot of we're convening. We're working a lot of, a phone call away from them if they need anything. But they're doing incredibly, these are companies a little bit, more sophisticated, but a little bit further along the growth curve. So they've been doing an incredible job really pivoting and adapting. And frankly, sometimes there's a time when you just need to give people space too, to maneuver. So we're giving them the space, but they know that we're there for them as well.
Cool. Another question from Sarah here. So we know that you can't comment on companies in the economic development pipeline, but curious how COVID may have impacted the ability to recruit or expand new business into the region.
I don't know if we know that yet. I mean, what I would say is, at least from my opinion, one is this is not a regional thing, right? So this is not impacting just Atlanta. It's not just impacting, one part of the country. So everybody's in the same boat. So I would argue that the merits of Atlanta for a company that is looking to make a move, still continue to be there, right? Now, again, without any data, I'm not saying this is happening. Is this going to slow down activity? Is this going to, make companies, as you would expect, companies I'm sure are putting a pause on a lot of activity. You've seen that in general, whether it's hiring, whether it's whatever the case might be. So I'd imagine there'd be a pause there. And then I think we still have a lot to learn in terms of what that means in terms of behaviors of those companies and site selectors going forward.
Yep. A couple more questions in that range. So obviously, you guys have access to executives that are, within the Atlanta region, and curious if you feel like there's any sense if the economy or the stock market might bounce back quickly once this is over, or will the economic downturn, you think, be with us for a long time? Obviously, it's a hard forecasting question, but I'm curious if you have any sense on that.
I mean, look, I don't know. I mean, if I knew that, I'd probably have these types of calls. But so I don't know. I mean, what I would go back to. Obviously, so much of it comes back to the virus that none of us can control how it's going to behave. So that's, I think, the first thing. I mean, look, we have a vibrant, we've had it going into this in terms of Atlanta, at least, we've had a vibrant economy, vibrant, ecosystem, diverse, lots of different industries. So, that's definitely a strength that helps us as a region. But knowing there's obviously real impact and real jobs and real, livelihoods, that are being impacted by this as well too. First and foremost, obviously making sure everybody's healthy, but I would say in terms of the stock market, who knows? I think people would, if they look at what's happened in the market, I know it was down yesterday, but the fact that it had an up week last week, I think would shock some people. I mean, who knows? And we know that there's an economic impact. I think the market right now is trying to figure out and seeing if they've priced it in for the next, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. But we still have a while to understand really what's happening there.
For sure. A question from Dale. What's your reaction to creating retail credits as a part of a financial stimulus package?
I don't know. I mean, again, we have a lot of folks, a lot of people in the business community, and particularly those who are closer to the retail that are, working with that. So in that one, I would probably defer to, there's like the Georgia Restaurant Association and several other organizations that have been really working in terms of their with their members around that space. So I'm not as familiar with those retail credits, but I know a lot of organizations are looking to how they could help their sectors.
Gotcha. And one other question, a little bit of again, sort of prediction. I'm just curious for your opinion. Do you see manufacturing reshoring in the new normal? What does Atlanta's manufacturing sector look like in a year? So a little bit of crystal ball.
Yeah, and again, it's so hard to tell. There's a lot of assumptions you can make that around what's happening. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussions and a lot of that's going to come to a lot of our companies around town and around the country, how they think about supply chain, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of evaluation of what's worked, what didn't. So I think that's going to be the kind of a big determinant of that. But again, there's still so much we're learning, and not just in terms of from a health perspective, but how the economy reacts to everything that's going on. So I'm sure there's a lot of people in our companies or manufacturing centers who are thinking about that, and but we still have a lot to learn on that as well.
Yeah. So I'll kind of I'll drive the conversation a little bit more towards action, perhaps. So it's been good conversation so far. Obviously some speculation of
Yeah.
what the future looks like. I would be curious, what advice in the form of maybe framework, methodology, or action, however you want to frame it, would you be giving to innovators who are saying right now, I got it, right? I need some leadership buy-in. I need to, not sort of shy away from maybe doing the hard work, but I'm not 100% sure where to begin. And I'd be curious if you have any sort of real pragmatic advice of saying, there's like 5 things you could be doing right now that would help continue to allow you to have an innovation practice that's achieving some sort of goal. It's not tone deaf, it has some buy-in, but certainly has value to the organization. I'd just be curious if you have any thoughts as to what that might look like.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I kind of was talking about earlier as well too. Is first of all, being grounded in your reality of your company too, because that's going to really guide what you're doing. But this rapid reprioritization is essential. Understanding how you fit and in the short term, and there's and you hear of groups who look at Chick-fil-A. I don't know if their innovation center was involved in it or not, but I mean they are innovating by the day. If you ever go by a Chick-fil-A right now, and how they manage their drive-through, how they manage that
Totally.
experience, how they do throughput. So take that to your company. Is there a role for you to play in that to help your operators or whatever to be able to adjust? And then rapid reprioritization also understands in terms of how you need to be thinking about the long term as well too. So I think that's one, right? So what's that balance of work you need to do to deal with the immediate and deal with the long term? And getting buy-in from your leadership around that as well too. And buy-in means alignment more so than, I would say this is not the time to be creating huge battles if your company's fighting for survival around, we should be investing in this, very, whatever optional thing. But I can't emphasize this element of being not being tone deaf or being empathetic. I'm a big believer in change management methodologies and understanding where your stakeholders are, where are they in the spectrum, what's most important to them. So if there's half a dozen constituents within your company that's critical for you to understand where your priorities are and where your efforts should be, I would go through your stakeholder analysis and understand what's changed, what's important to them right now, how do I fit to that, and how do I adopt to help support them in that, or how can I create a match between what I believe we could do to help them drive their objectives. So I would say that going back to your stakeholder plans is an essential part of that spectrum to survive. What I would say is not to do is go into a hole and think that everything's just gonna, you're gonna just pop up one day and everything's back to normal, because it's not. And it's not in terms of, how the consumers are gonna behave. It's not gonna be in terms of what your customer investment profile is gonna be, whatever the case might be. So you need to be engaged, you just need to be engaged in the right way. Don't be visible for the sake of just being visible. Be visible to be helpful, but definitely don't put yourself at all. You can create value for your company now, or create value for your company and be able to plant the seeds of how you can create value in the future.
Well, I'm sure you've heard some great stories about how leaders have embraced change in the past, several weeks. Is there any stories that are top of mind you'd want to share?
Yeah, in terms of the change and innovation the past few weeks. Yeah, no, well, look, I think there's so many, and some of them are under our nose and we don't even realize it. I mentioned before about in the startup ecosystem about so many companies that are really either pivoting or already really in the center of this COVID battle. I think, and John's on the phone, but there's like about 30 companies at ATDC that somehow, some way are either or either helping in terms of the health crisis, or helping on the financial side as well. A lot of them on the health side. And you're seeing that across the spectrum at Atlanta Tech Village, Russell Center, and so forth. On the corporate side, this is what I keep telling people, don't underestimate how much real innovation is taking place in places you don't even realize. Is even though for you and I it may seem minor or almost invisible as consumers, but it could be massive. Just think about what UPS has had to do in terms of its, it's changing its logistics framework and delivery. you're talking about an ecosystem now where we've gone from so many packaging and shipments going to businesses to going to residential, which is a whole different, access point and distribution model. So those innovations sometimes are logistics. So it's not a new product. It's about process or speed, or even the teleworking aspect that's going on right now. To have, some of our companies around town, and I hear what they've done and rapidly gone to 10,000 employees working from home, and and what they're doing. That is innovation. That's very real, especially at the speed that it's happened for the scale that's happening. But I will mention a couple kind of cool things that have been going on. A little bit. This is going back to the entrepreneurial side, but the gathering spots, some of you may know them, but they're a membership driven organization, and they really do a lot to help connect entrepreneurs in Atlanta. And you would say, man, this is a membership, it's a place, they have multiple locations, or really multiple locations across the country, but Atlanta, it's a physical place. So you would say, man, are they done, or do they just retreat? The founders there have done an incredible job at pivoting into a kind of a digital membership that creates incredible value for them. And it's not just emails. I mean, really making a virtual membership club. I'm so impressed with what they're doing. And they're at the point now of how do we help our members? And then they're doing incredible things. I think last night they had Cam Newton as a guest in a virtual fireside chat. I mean, so it's instead of just, and they were just featured in the Atlanta Business Chronicle too. So instead of just saying, we're a victim to this, which I mean, obviously they're being impacted. They've really gone and leveraged their digital platform to be able to provide digital delivery to their customers. And then one that just inspires me every time I hear about it. Many of you have probably heard of Goodr, G-O-O-D-R, which is a tech a company that has been growing, was featured at the Super Bowl last year here in Atlanta. And what they do is they take kind of excess capacity of food that are many companies sometimes produce with all the events and so forth they have, and help feed the homeless with it too. And it really is a cost savings for the companies, with a lot of logistics items that's involved in that. So in itself, it's a pure mission. They've done an incredible job though, kind of adapting, and in a couple ways in terms of partnering with State Farm and the Atlanta Hawks to create pop-up stores within the city of Atlanta, pop-up grocery stores, to help those who are, because we have a real issue and crisis around people who cannot get access to food, and they're solving that. And with the help, and what Kevin has done is pretty amazing around that. And I think it's a great example. You talk about empathetic innovation of what Jasmine has done with Goodr in terms of taking something that's a real human need that needs to be solved, not that we want to solve, needs to be solved, and using the power of her technology platform and entrepreneurial spirit and drive, and partnering with some big organizations around town to be able to help contribute to help solve that issue. There's so many examples out there, and so many that I probably haven't mentioned. We just need to continue to do that.
There was a question a little bit earlier around, is the chamber, let's see, where was it? Is the chamber doing any sort of standing innovation forum, bringing together corporate innovators on a regular basis?
It's funny you mentioned that. We're actually been talking we met a lot with our corporate innovation community. One of the things we have for 2020 is how we work more closely with the corporate innovation ecosystem. Look, we work closely with all the corporations involved, obviously, with our board and all that at that level. And then there's certain kind of subcommittees, called advisory boards we have, where we do have some of the chief strategy officers and marketing officers around town that have relationships with us, and we work with them to help drive the innovation ecosystem. But I think a big thing for us right now is no different than what we've done, and how do we help, how do we stay connected with the startup ecosystem? It's also about the corporate innovation community, because that's really an asset for us. So the more connectivity we could drive, the more they can share best practices with each other, the more we can help them thrive, the better Atlanta's innovation ecosystem will be. So stay tuned on that.
Cool, that's awesome. There was a question earlier, I'm going to modify it a little bit, but here's the essence. Is there anything that people on this call today can be doing, or obviously the Atlanta ecosystem in general, to either be surfacing the right types of stories for the chamber to hear about, and or just collaborate with the chamber? Like, what does that really look like if I'm someone on the call today who's like, I don't really have a relationship with you guys, but what should I be doing?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely, reach out to me or folks on my team or Grant Wainscott or Cynthia Curry, also an economic development team who we work very closely with, particularly in this ecosystem. So simply reach out as well. I will tell you, for those on the startup side, we build a lot of relationships with our entrepreneurial centers. So the ATVs, ATDCs, Russell Centers, Tech Square Labs, and all that, because they're an incredible job aggregating that kind of access point to entrepreneurs, and they serve them in a way that we could never serve them. They do an incredible job. So we're here to support them. And so, that relationship with them help us access that ecosystem. I mentioned the Back by ATL program, which helps us access into the mid-market ecosystem. On the corporate ecosystem, those of you in corporations, you may not know of things happening in your company, and because corporations are big, complex organizations, so feel free to reach out. One of the things I'd love to see more of, frankly, from my corporate innovation ecosystem is more stories. And we're seeing more stories of startups. I just mentioned a few things that are getting featured in Fast Company and Business Week. I would love to see more great, cool success stories from our corporate partners that we could feature and talk about, and we will. So I would just say definitely reach out. And we are looking also at how could we be more involved with the corporate innovation ecosystem from that perspective to help connect that. But one thing I'll mention too, what you guys do and what others do around town to keep those connected. This is why I'm here. This is why we participate and connect it. The more authentic and organic we could have convenings and connections, I think that's helpful. Because we never want to have anything that feels forced or unnecessary. So when someone like you and others do something that's of value, we're going to be 100% behind that. But we're here to help tell stories. We're here to help drive connectivity. So I would just say, just reach out.
Awesome. Well, I think we're just about out of time, so I'm going to shut it down with this. So, Alex, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate all the insight and advice you've provided. For the crowd, let's see here. I'd like to ask you to activate your video now. Take a minute to go through the gallery view and scroll through to see everyone who joined today. We're super glad to have had you. So we'll be posting this webcast to YouTube and sending the link along with a recap to everyone who was listening today. Obviously, please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues if there's any value you think that would come to them. And please join us next week on Tuesday the 28th at 9 a.m. as we host my friend and innovation partner, Scott Sanchez, Chief Innovation Officer from Nationwide Insurance. Scott's a great dude, awesome insights, and we're looking forward to chatting with him. So again, thank you everybody for being here. And Karen, back to you in the studio. Anything else you need to do?
Nope, not a thing. Thanks so much, Alex. Really appreciate the time and the conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Awesome. Stay safe, be healthy, and keep innovating.